Hey everybody. The activity for section 2.2.2 is kind of related to your art classes. If you've ever had an art class before, a lot of these terms are going to sound familiar. So I wanted to, this is kind of just, all it is really is reading to you the stuff that was on the website. I mean, hang tight, hang with me. I just wanted to get you guys the basics of what these words mean and sort of how they're used in a product. So first, we're going to talk about 7 visual design elements. These are integral components used in creating a design. You got line, color, value, shape, form, space, and texture. So line, first of all, they start with point. They sort of get you there. The point is the most basic element of design. It has a position, but it doesn't have dimension. And that's true in math as well. Like if you think about a point in coordinate plane or in 3-space, you've got a point that has a location but no dimension to it. Usually you draw a dot so you can see it, but it doesn't technically have a dimension. And really all it is telling you where something is. It says this is exactly where this thing is. The line, however, is kind of like they define it as a path of a point moving through space. So a line in math is always a straight thing with no ends, goes in both directions. But here they use it to mean also curves and mostly line segments and whatnot. So the line itself, it can be used for defining boundaries. It can be used to indicate sort of how big something is, how much volume it has. You can create perspective and depth. You can make patterns and textures appear with it. It suggests movement and maybe even emotion to a piece when you're talking about art. There are 4 basic kinds that they talk about, and these are what I'm going to talk about next. So vertical lines are usually about being strong, stable. It's very formal and very dignified. Yeah, that's the other word in there. So dignity, strength, formality, stability. You see it a lot with architecture and technical drawings. There's a lot of vertical lines. It's not very free-flowing. It doesn't feel relaxed. It feels like you've got something solid and strong going on there. When there are a lot of horizontal lines, it's more calm, peaceful, relaxed. So you think of landscapes, you think of art that has lots of sort of things that stretch side to side. You think about having like a panoramic view of something you can see farther left and right the horizon. Diagonal lines, in this case, they're kind of used for depth as well as for a sense of movement and action and activity. They kind of all go back to a focal point. You can tell that there's depth. You can tell where it's, you can tell it's more dynamic than just rigid buildings or just flat planes. And then they say curved lines, which as a math person, that grates my nerves so badly. Curves will give you a sense of freedom and soothing. It's more organic. It's more natural. You'll see it a lot with things that are ergonomically designed. They'll be curved so that your hand can fit around them properly, or if it's going on your back or your shoulders, however it fits with the body, it'll be curved. All right. And just for an example, while we're talking about curves and lines, if you look at something like this is, I have no idea if you can see it. I'm assuming you can. It's like a little clock timer thing. And most of the lines are straight lines on here. You got straight lines. They're very clean. There's not a lot of movement. There's curves around the edges, but most of it's just straight lined. If you have something like a mouse, you could see the lines on the mouse. They're mostly curves. The outside edges are mostly curved. The only flat part really is the bottom where it hits the desk or something. Everything's got curve to it. You had a product like, I got a crummy pair of headphones over here, old headphones, a lot of curves. It's going with the body. It's going to have to curve a lot. There's no straight line on this thing unless you look at it from certain angles. So that's what line is saying. It's saying, what do the boundaries of your object look like? What do the boundaries of the regions of color or texture look like on an object? In art in a picture, it's just where are these boundary lines in the picture? Where can you see that someone had like a solid pen stroke or something if they're drawing a picture? Color. There's 3 basic qualities of color. It's the hue, which is like the base color, red, green, blue. You got value, which is how dark or how light it is. And you've got saturation, which is how pure or intense it is relative to just gray. So those are 3 qualities of color. Have you ever seen when you open up like a choose your own color kind of thing, and there's a whole plane, you can choose the color, and then like on that color, there's palette, there's like it's red, but up here it's lighter red, closer to white. Down here it's closer to gray, and so it's got value in one direction and saturation in the other or something. I should find one and take a picture and show you guys. Color temperature is something that you probably talked about in elementary school art classes. You have your warm colors, your reds, orange, yellows. Those are all going to pop forward, make something seem like it's in the foreground of a picture. It's going to make it seem larger. It's going to usually draw your eye, especially if it's the only bit of warm color in a composition. The cool colors are your blues, purples, and greens, and that's going to be calm and restful. They're going to make things seem smaller or less important. It's going to fade in the background. It's going to seem like it's farther away. And here's an example. Again, the warm color of the pots along the wall, they stick out. The ones are reds, or yellows, and oranges. The butterfly, the center of it sticks out because it's got that bit of reddish orange in it, and it stands out against the cool colors. Something like this, it feels warmer, and the blue sticks out in that paper airplane especially, but that's just because of the contrast. It's not so much that it pops forward in the view. Yeah, there's colors. Value specifically talks about how light or dark something is. If something is very light, in the middle, in the mid-range, or very dark. And you can use value when you're drawing something 3D that's on a 2D piece of paper. A lot of the time your shading is what's going to indicate that there's any sort of depth in that picture. You can see this building kind of looks like it's coming towards you in the center. The center part is closer to you, even though you know it's all flat on the screen. And that's kind of how like Onshape works. If you notice when you rotate something, it has light and dark sides on that, so you can tell kind of it looks 3D even though it's on a flat surface on the screen of your computer. Shape. It gives you three basic types of shape. If there are geometric shapes, that's your squares, circles, polygons, triangles, things that have names in geometry. You got mechanical shapes, which are in general made of both straight and curved boundary lines, and there's a picture of gears and screws and things, washers over there. And then you have organic things that are more natural. They simulate nature. They are more flowing. There usually are fewer straight line chunks in a natural organic shape. And the example they give, they've got us this picture from different views of an electric razor, a shaver. And you can see how it's got curves from almost every direction. There are so few straight lines except in the very center where those pieces meet. Now, if shape is a 2D shape, form is the 3D part of that. So is it spherical? Is it cubic? This guy's kind of a cube. This guy's got forms that are kind of made from almost ellipses, kind of. There's a little bit of a circular arc right there, you can tell. That's the 3D form of it. That's like a cylindrical rolly wheel in the middle. In fact, my other little mouse has a cylindrical rolly wheel in the middle as well. So usually you imply it through the way you shade it and the way you use the 2D shapes that you're making when you're drawing things out by hand. Here it says that these are pyramids. You've got different values on adjacent surfaces. That makes it look like the object has been lit from one side, and it sort of gives a 3D appearance. And of course, they're pyramids because it looks like the pyramids in Giza. So you can sort of, your brain puts all this together as you're looking at it, but the tricks that are being used here are the shading, the way the lines are organized. There's triangles in there, and they're shaded a certain way, so you can tell it's supposed to be faces of a pyramid. Space. Space is an area between or around parts of an image, or the implied depth of the image. You may have heard of positive space and negative space. Positive space has that thing in it. Negative space does not have the thing in it, basically, at the most basic level. So space, if you have an item like the headphones, you can see there's a space here where the head would go. There's space in between here where there's a space up in here. There's gaps in the actual physical product. Space doesn't really come up much here. I mean, if you look at the angle, you can tell that certain things are inset or recessed, or there's little texture on the back because there's a gap there. There's a concave space right there, but that doesn't have a lot of gaps. I'm trying to find out if there's anything else here that has good use of space as a product. Stapler, there's definitely a space in there. You can see the shape of the space, and you can see it from the front. You can see through it from the back, actually, if you look closely. So that's what they're talking about when they say space. There's a picture next of someone holding something cylindrical. It looks like it might be a lens. You can sort of see there's space through the middle of that in the picture, and there's space around the person's hand. You can tell that the sky is wide open above you and that there's space between the trees as they go back into the distance. And you can have open spaces. You can have cramped looking spaces. Things be cluttered or busy. And that's kind of the use of space, is sort of where things are fitting together or where there's a gap. And texture is the look of the surface. You can make things look smooth when it reflects more light and there's more intense color to it. You can make it rough. Rough surfaces absorb more light. They're going to be darker. They're going to have more like a busy patterning in them or something. You can tell it looks like there's a broken wall or concrete over here in the one picture, and then there's also the wood grain you can look at there in the other one. Those are different textures. More examples. Those smooth droplets look very shiny. The rough bark it's not as shiny. It's rougher. You can tell it would scratch if you rubbed your hand along it. There's a fluffy puppy, which is adorable. So those are the basic principles or design elements that you're going to see in visual design. The principles, however, that's slightly different. It's more to do with the composition of your piece, of what it looks like. A lot of these are used in photography, especially like when you're trying to have a photography contest. How is your picture balanced? What's being emphasized? Is there any rhythm, proportion? How's that being used? What's contrasting? What brings it together in unity? And is it economical in the use of elements in the piece? So balance. It's a visual balance and it's kind of physical balance too. Sometimes like you can tell, like in this balancing rocks picture, it looks like there's about the same amount of rock weight on either side of that little balanced rock. And it's how the elements are distributed within your design. You've got symmetrical, which is a formal balance. So like this guy's pretty symmetrical. It's even on both sides. I mean, they're not exactly identical, but it's pretty symmetrical. You've got asymmetry, or asymmetrical balance, which is an informal thing. And radial, which is like if it's got rotational symmetry. It looks the same from different angles going around in a circle. Here's examples of formal balance. They have identical visual weight relating to a center line or center axis, so it looks the same on both sides. I mean, the colors are different in the chess pieces, but you can tell that they are basically mirror image of each other, almost exactly the way things are set up. It's just lights and darks are switched. Here's an asymmetrical informal balance example. The elements are not identical, but you have them arranged in such a way that on each sort of side of that center line, you can see that it's got kind of the same visual quality, same visual weight. It may not be identical, but there's enough interest on each side of the line in the middle. And here's some examples of radial balance. There's a tire that's got 5-way symmetry around the center point. I don't know why they drew a center line on that, because if it's symmetrical rotationally, you'd want to sort of, anyways. It looks like it's got a pattern that goes and repeats as you turn around that center point. Emphasis is what you use to draw the attention to one area. There's going to be a focal point in your picture. Where does the eye naturally go to, and how can you encourage the eye to go to that point? You can achieve this through things of different sizes, where things are placed in your picture, the shape it has, if there's contrast, if there's lines or curves. If you look at this droplet, everything kind of looks like it's almost symmetrical around a slightly off-center line. And it's got all those, the ripples that are coming out, those ellipses from this angle, but they're circles, they're centered underneath where that drop is, so it draws you into where that droplet is. There's also sort of that color around it. There's the reflection of sort of the yellows around there. They're sort of drawing you into the center of those concentric ellipses from this angle, circles from above. And I think that the droplet itself looks a lot shinier than the rest of the water does because of how the water, or how the light is focused in through that droplet. So that's where your eye goes. You might have something where you've got lines coming into a point, like if you have a landscape with horizon lines coming, or there's a horizon and there's all these sort of like the picture early on with the city and all those diagonals coming towards one point. Here's an example of product where they emphasize using color. They've got red on your seatbelt buttons, so you can find it easier in the dark, or if you're struggling, like you get in a wreck and you can't find it as easily. If it's bright red compared to the stuff around it, it might be easier to find that button and release your seatbelt and get out of the car safely. Contrast. Contrast is a degree of relative difference between the elements of your piece. You can have color contrasting, you can have texture contrasting, you use complementary colors versus clashing colors. You can see the one with the buildings, there's one that's like rough stone on the surface, and the one above is all glass, and it's more straight lines. You've got the chair that's bright red in the middle of all these sort of bland, simple chairs and the white backdrop. The typewriter and the computer, you've got that contrast right there because of the colors. And just the concept as well. You know, that typewriters are sort of a thing of the past and laptop is more present. So that is how contrast can work. And here's an example of a car. They want you to notice the engine block and the drivetrain there and the wheels. So they've highlighted that with that warm yellow color, and that pops out. And the rest of the car, you can still see where that stuff is placed within that car, but the car is outlined with the blues and the cool colors, so it doesn't pop at you as much. And that is a contrast. Rhythm. Rhythm's one of those cool things that, like, it has a lot of parallels to what you do with music anyways, and I like it. Rhythm is when you have repeated use of lines or curves, shapes, colors, textures, patterning in general. It's usually harmonious pattern or sequence. There are 4 types. Regular means you've got the same thing repeated at the same kind of intervals. Random means you have something repeated, but it's not at regular intervals. It's not even the same angle or whatever, or color. Let me show you the examples of those two before I talk about gradated and graduated. But here you can see it's these curves. It's kind of like ripples. They all match the curve beforehand, and it looks like they might be very, very similar to each other if they're not identical. This is a couple examples of regular rhythm. You've got this building. The facade has the same feature repeated at the same interval as it goes along the front. There's a picture of bricks on a walkway. They are not all the same size and shape and color and everything, but they are similar enough. You can tell that that's just because the angle the picture was taken at, that these bricks are tessellating and they're all the same and it's the same intervals. It's a pattern. A random rhythm. These are examples of random rhythms. You know that it looks like a bunch of stars are painted on that top one there, maybe like a nebula. Maybe it's just an abstract thing. Maybe it's not supposed to be anything in particular, but you can tell it's a bunch of dots. They're not all clustered the same density. Some of them are more spread out. They're different colors, sort of applied at random, but you get the point. It's a bunch of dots have been made. The picture with the birds, those are all silhouettes of birds and their shadows. They probably are all pigeons. They all are not looking the same way. They all are not the same size or location in the foreground. It's kind of scattered at random, and that's another random rhythm. So it says repetition is random or situated at irregular intervals. So a gradated rhythm is something where you change one detail with each repetition. So in these two examples, you got size is different. You might have it where you have the same thing, but you change the color with every repetition, or you change the shape of it, maybe the window in the top of the house. Maybe it goes from square to maybe a circular window and then like a semicircle and then a triangle. You know, you have something that changes each time, but everything else kind of stays the same. And then there's graduated, where the intervals are what change. Like the same thing is repeated, but they farther and farther apart as you go across the piece, or they get closer and closer together. It's kind of an ombre effect. Proportion. How is proportion used? Are the relative components kind of the same with respect to size, or are things scaled a certain way? Proportion, I mean, it's hard to really pick one on this, but it's like, because the faces, even though they're kind of rounded corners, each face is basically the same shape. It's just they get smaller, they scale up or down. That's a proportion thing. The interfaces, they're all the edges are proportional as they go in and out. You might have, in this picture here, you got a guy, looks like he's way too big for that little go-kart thing. So that's a proportion thing. You can have something that's out of proportion that'll draw attention. You know, things that are in proportion that'll make it look like it belongs together. Unity, consistent use of design elements. So in the top picture with all the glass windows and building facades, even though one of the buildings has like this very geometric, regular sort of pattern with the windows, and the other one has these cool curves that come along, it's still got a repetition, but it's these curves instead of these like rectangles and triangles and everything. It's all got glass. It's all sort of a glass window facade. So you can kind of see that the texture of it stays kind of the same throughout. The balance is kind of, with that the diagonal swoop that comes down. This is how it is from my direction. It might look different from your direction. That swoop that comes down, it's kind of consistently balancing from the top corner to the bottom corner. And you've got these little fence segments. They're all the same shape. They're all the same basic outer part. The only thing that changes is if it's got like wrought iron fencing or brick fencing or maybe a hedge fence in the middle of it. That's unity. It brings it together. And then economy means basically you're using a minimum of elements. You're not throwing everything at it at the same time. You're not throwing extra stuff you don't need in there for no reason. And you can achieve this by just removing things that are extraneous, things that don't add necessarily but might take away or confuse someone or distract you from the point of your piece. In simplicity, it says, there is beauty, and less is more. These are concepts you might have heard before, but something like this, it doesn't have like weird designs all the way around. It doesn't have pointy ears coming off of it. It doesn't have springs and extra lights blinking and flashing. It's something that's kind of simple. It's not too complicated looking. It is what it is. So that is what economy means. This picture, I'm not sure if there's a reason behind it. Is it simple because it only has the same four, the people are repeated, and it's got the two colors basically with different values? Maybe that's why it's economic. They may also be alluding to something with the fact that the guy's pushing a sphere. It's easier to push something that's simpler than the cube. I don't know. That's the end of that presentation, y'all. I had folks doing a visual analysis of a teapot or a kettle that I had in class. I might go ahead and give you guys something online to look at so you all have the same thing to look at. And just tell me ways that you see color used, ways that you see horizontal and vertical lines used, shading, things like that. So it's just sort of an exercise. For me, I find a lot of this is kind of subjective. Like the things that I'm saying that I notice about a piece, you might not notice. I'm not trained in arts and visual arts. I don't have a graphic design degree. I'm not exactly entirely sure that what I see in a picture is what was intended by the artist or the graphic designer or the designer of an item. Like maybe they didn't mean this to look very simple or to have proportion. Maybe it's just something I'm reading into it. So for me, it's kind of subjective. Just fill in a few of the boxes, do your best, and and submit that guy in Canvas. Alrighty, y'all have a good one. I might do like a little vocab quiz on some of these terms. So if you want to just familiarize yourself with what it is, I'll probably put up a study guide for that if we're doing a vocab quiz on it. Alrighty, y'all have a good one. I'm gonna sign off.